I remember when I was growing up, we never had these resurrection appearances for a Sunday gospel, and of course we didn't go to Mass during the week, most of us, so we never heard them. I never really heard them until I was a Jesuit. But the resurrection appearances of Jesus are among the most marvelously beautiful passages in the gospel. And today's, that first day of the week, the very day of the resurrection, which we read on Easter Monday in the monastery, is perhaps the most beautiful, with the most lovely lessons for us about how we should live and what how life manifests. So let's go through the passage a little bit. So they're walking along, the two of them, it's good to have a companion, or several. They're walking along and they're discussing what had happened. They're discussing and debating, as it says. So that's a good thing to do. Talk about life. Share your experiences. Debate what it all means as you walk along. And then Jesus comes to walk with them, which he always does. Jesus is always walking with us. And of course, you know the famous story about the footprints on the sand and all of that. But the point is, Jesus is always walking with us. And as it says about them in the gospel today, we don't recognize him. Now, it said their eyes were kept from recognizing him as if it was some kind of special miracle or something. But Jesus looked different. Jesus could, the resurrection body, ours too, by the way, but Jesus is first of all, can take basically any shape it wants. It's that, just energy, electric energy, basically. So he appeared different. They couldn't recognize him. But it's also a parable about how we don't recognize him either. He may come to us in the guise of another person, an event, an inspiration, but Jesus is, in fact, always with us. And so he encourages us and prods us, says, what are you talking about? You know, what's going on? Because Jesus is always interested in what's going on. As of course they look downcast, as we often are, usually are. Depends on our personality and our life experience and our life situation. But very often we're discouraged. All the more reason for Jesus to be with us and to ask us to go a little deeper, think about what's going on and what could change, etc. So he asked them, and they described the situation. You know, they were part of the group that was, hoping. So that's perhaps in our tradition the most famous word in the whole gospel. In Latin, sperabamus. The original Greek is elpitzomen. It means we were hoping. We were hoping. Which is what we often say ourselves, is it not? We had been hoping, we were hoping, but not so much now. So that's why Jesus needs to be there to encourage us, because so often we lose hope, right? Maybe it's about relatively unimportant things, but often it's not. It's about our life, our career, our marriage, our salvation, our hope for the world. Whatever it is, we tend to lose hope. And then Jesus gives his little gentle but stinging reproach. How foolish you are. I mean, it sounds a little harsh, but it is true. We're pretty foolish. We don't really understand our lives. I mean, how much of an effort do we really make to understand our lives in a deeper spiritual way, even psychologically? I mean, do we really? Anyway, he says we're foolish and slow of heart to grasp. Not just crazy or our minds are narrow, but you're slow of heart. It's only on the level of the heart that we can truly embrace and understand our lives with God, with one another, our friends, our spouses, our children. We have to open our hearts to life. But they're often so defended. We build fences around them because we've been traumatized or we've been betrayed or whatever it is. So our hearts aren't trying to open themselves to understand. We're slow of heart. And Jesus understands that. He says, "Learn from me, I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find refreshment for your souls. All you who are burdened and labored," he says in Matthew's Gospel, "heavily burdened, I will refresh you." So we need to open our hearts to what Jesus says. And what he says, if you recall just a moment ago, he says, was it not necessary for the Messiah to suffer and so enter into his glory? All right, we've had some pretty horrible understandings of that and some very lousy theology across the centuries where we said it was necessary for Jesus to suffer because God really wanted a bloody sacrifice because he was so mad at us, and he had to have his son, his very own son, pour out his own blood to be appeased in his anger, which is horrific. If you worship a God like that, change your God. That's not who God is. So it's not that he needed to suffer. God didn't need his blood to forgive us. So what is the lesson? The lesson is he was human. He shared our life. He walked with us as he continues to walk with us in our humanity. And so it was necessary to, if he's going to be born, he's going to die. And so enter into the glory. And yes, since he lived such an exemplary life, as he was a great prophet, as they said in the gospel in word and deed before God and all the people, well, of course they killed him. Any great prophet who is powerful in word and deed before God and all the people is going to get killed. I know Martin Luther King. I mean, there are plenty of examples in our own time. Because the message is a little too challenging. Anyway, the point is, however you die, you got to die and go through human life and so enter into the glory. But what redeemed us, what can still redeem us, is if in his company we live and die as he did. We can enter into our glory, our resurrection, if we necessarily, take on the burdens and the sufferings and the inevitable sufferings of human life, the physical burdens, the psychological burdens, the economical burdens, the social burdens, the individual, journey that we're all on. We take it on the way Jesus did. Jesus became one of us to show, it is worth it after all. It's still worth it. All the joy and wonder and marvel of life in the midst of all the sufferings, which are unavoidable. So I go with you, Jesus says to us, you come with me, and we'll get through it together. But it's necessary. You can't avoid it. And he showed us the way by not avoiding it. That's why it was necessary. And so enter into your glory. And so then he opened up the scriptures to show the many examples. And if you were paying attention, you saw the first reading is Peter's discourse on Pentecost. And he has a long quote from Psalm 16 about the Messiah, or your loved one, Lord. You did not allow him to suffer corruption, you did not abandon him to the netherworld. You're showing me the paths of life, endless joys in your presence. And that's one of the Psalms that Jesus probably explained on the way. How God's beloved, all of us, beginning with Christ, all of us are not abandoned to the netherworld and will not see, ultimate corruption. And he will show us the paths of life and fullness of joys in his presence. So that applies to Christ. Peter says it doesn't obviously apply to David. David got buried, and also it must be applied to the Messiah and then to all of us. So that may probably one of the scriptures that Jesus explained to him on the way. Anyway, they get to place to where they were going, and he pretends to go further. He wants to be invited to stay. So let's do that. Come stay with us. It's towards evening and the day is far spent. ad vesperacit, as it says in the Latin. Very famous. The day is far spent. And for those of us who, like me, are old, that can have a very literal meaning. The day is far spent. Please stay with me. But there are many times in our lives, as I've been trying to explain, when it seems like the dark is coming on and the night is coming, and we need you to stay with us. So let's invite him to do that. So he does, and he comes in, and look what happens. He sits at table with them, and then does the ritual that he did, at the Last Supper, and then for the multiplication of the loaves, he takes the loaves, he blesses them and breaks them and offers them to us, as he does right here this morning, by the way. And that's when they recognize him. But look what he's doing. He's having fellowship with them. It's not just the holy sacrifice of the Mass, as we so often say. It's a meal. It's a festive meal. It's a gathering when we all come together, as we see in the early church especially, and we share together. Maybe that's one way of softening, the inevitable sufferings of life, that we have food and fellowship together. Babette's feast, or whatever you like, dinner with Andre, where we actually get together and share. It doesn't have to be the Eucharist only. That's a symbol and a prod. It's a prime example of fellowship with God and with one another. It should be anyway. But then it's a reminder that whenever we sit down together and have a meal with our friends, with our family, in a restaurant, at home, wherever it is, whenever we're sharing and discussing and debating what life means and living life, nourishing one another and ourselves with the food and the fellowship, that's when we recognize Jesus. Whether here or at Le Monde, wherever you might be, you're experiencing the presence of Christ. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, right? And then he vanishes. Because they don't need his physical resurrected presence anymore, because they have them, they know he's always with them. They know he's in their hearts. In fact, they say that. We're not our hearts, slow of heart that we were not our hearts burning within us, as he explained the scriptures to us. And in their enthusiasm, they run home in the dark, basically run all the way back to the community and say, well, the community, precedes their joy and says, the Lord is indeed risen and has appeared to Simon. Do you notice that? He appears to Simon, first of all, no doubt to reassure him. Yes, you betrayed me, but I won't betray you. Which he says to us, no doubt, in our lives as well. Yes, you betrayed me, but I won't betray you. Because Jesus is always with us, in our suffering and in our rising. So it's a very beautiful passage. And it reminds us not to be afraid of probing life and discovering life, not to be afraid of living life, because Christ is always with us, who shared our life and shares our life now. And he will share our suffering, and he will share our death, which is also inevitable. But with him and in him we can rise to new life. Not just when we physically die, but we can rise to new life every day in hope. No longer we were hoping, but we are hoping. And we know our hope will not disappoint, as Romans says, because the Holy Spirit has been poured into our hearts abundantly in the love of God.